My name is Keith, and these are my stamps. Episode 29, The Bahamas. Bahamas is an archipelagic state in the Atlantic Ocean. An archipelagic state is a United Nations designation for an island country with one or more archipelagos, and it's to do with claiming the waters between the islands as part of the sovereign territory. Bahamas was one of the original 5 archipelagic states designated in 1982, along with Fiji, Philippines, Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea. Now, apparently, there are 22 of them. The US, Cuba, and the Turks and Caicos Islands border the Bahamas, for want of a better word. The Bahamas, the nearest part of the Bahamas is 180 kilometers, that's 110 miles from Florida. And the distance from Miami to Nassau is 296 kilometers, 184 miles. From Nassau to Havana in Cuba, it's 551 kilometers, 342 miles. The name, well, lots of sources say that the name comes from Columbus's landfall. He arrived and he named them the Islands of the Shallow Sea, or in Spanish, Bahama. However, recently there has been some dispute about this, saying that this is just folk etymology, and it really comes from the Lucayan word for large upper middle island, which was Bahama. There are around 700 islands and over 250 cays or keys. A cay or a key is a small sandy island on a coral reef. Of all of these islands and cays, about 30 of them are inhabited. I've named some of them there. The land area is just over 10,000 square kilometres, that's 3,800 square miles, which is roughly the size of Hawaii Island, the largest of the islands in Hawaii, or about half the size of Wales. All of the islands are pretty much low and flat, and the overall population of the Bahamas is around 400,000, about 75% of whom live in the capital city, Nassau. The history of the Bahamas. Between 300 and 400 AD, people came to the islands from what would become Cuba. Between 900 and 1500, the Lucayan people settled. They were a group of the Arawaks. 1492, Columbus arrived on the island of San Salvador. At the time, it's estimated there were around 40,000 Lucayans, but within 25 years, they'd been wiped out, mostly from disease. Over half of them died from smallpox, but also from slavery and other hardships. In 1649, the English Puritans, known as the Eleutheran Adventurers, landed, but severe food shortages meant that they had to look to the American colonies for help, and they received supplies from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In return, they sent a local hardwood, the proceeds from the sale of which later helped purchase the land that would become Harvard University. Eleuthera was the island, the name they gave to the island that they landed on, and it comes from the Greek for free. In the 1600s to the early 1700s, pirates and privateers, including Blackbeard, Calico Jack, and Anne Bonny, made the islands their home. In 1670, Nassau, which had originally been named Charlestown after King Charles II, was founded as a commercial port, but was soon overrun by lawlessness. In 1684, Nassau was destroyed by the Spanish. In 1695, it was rebuilt, this time renamed Nassau in honour of King William III, who was from the House of Nassau. Then the Spanish and the French combined, attacked, and pirates used it as a base. It was a bit of a mess. So in 1718, King George I made the Bahamas a British Crown colony and appointed Woodes Rogers as governor, given the task of cleaning up the place, which he did. 300 pirates surrendered, and the rest of them, including Blackbeard, fled. Woodes Rogers, earlier in his career, teamed up with Dampier, who I talked about in the Australia episode, and also Woodes Rogers was the captain of the ship that rescued Alexander Selkirk, the presumed inspiration for the novel Robinson Crusoe. Anyhow, back to the Bahamas. 1783, the American colonists loyal to Britain arrived in Eleuthera. Many brought their slaves with them. In 1807, the British Slave Trade Act abolished slave trading to British possessions, and the British Royal Navy was given the right to intercept slave ships on the high seas. And during this time, thousands of Africans were freed from the slave ships and resettled in the Bahamas. During the American Civil War, 1881 to 1885, the Bahamas benefited from being used as a trading post. Britain's textile industry depended on cotton from the southern United States, but British ships were blockaded by the Union. So blockade runners took the cotton to the Bahamas, where it was traded with the British for enormous profits. In 1898, the Hotel and Steamship Service Act provided government support for the construction of hotels and other tourist services. Prohibition in the USA in 1919 also provided the Bahamas with an opportunity for gain. The wharf in Nassau was expanded to accommodate the flow of alcohol. 1962, Nassau Agreement between JFK and the British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan to end the Skybolt crisis. I had never heard of the Skybolt crisis. It was all about the US providing or not providing the warheads for the United Kingdom's nuclear deterrent. In 1964, a new constitution was adopted, granting internal autonomy to the Bahamas. In 1973, 325 years of British rule ended and the Bahamas became an independent nation. During the 70s and 80s, the expansion in tourism and offshore finance made Bahamas far more prosperous. I looked up offshore finance and quickly got completely confused by terms such as shadow banking, conduit and sink OFCs, and base erosion and profit shifting. It all seems to do with paying less tax, but I don't understand it at all. However, it helped make the Bahamas a lot of money. The stamp issuing history. The first stamp was issued in 1859, and they have done so continuously to the present day. The currency, up until 1966, British money or Bahamian equivalent was used, 12 pence making 1 shilling, 20 shillings, £1. In 1966, 100 cents to 1 Bahamian dollar. The oldest stamps I have from the Bahamas are these. The original King George V series was from 1912, but the halfpenny green here is from the second issue in 1924, and the stamp in the middle of the 3 halfpence, quite why they decided to call it that and not 1.5 pence, I do not know, is from 1934. So actually the oldest of these three is the one on the right, the overprint war tax, which is from 1918 on a 1912 1 penny stamp. It's the second war tax overprint. The first war tax overprint had the words going all the way to the border, so the W touched the left and the X touched the right. This is the second one. Both of those were in 1918. There was a further war tax overprint in 1919 with war tax written in 2 words. From 1930, this stamp was to celebrate the centenary of the colony of the Bahamas in 1929. However, that's a little misleading. If you were paying attention to the history just now, you'll remember that the first settlers didn't arrive until 1649. However, this stamp is commemorating 1629, when King Charles I granted, and I quote, "the territories of Bahama and all other isles and islands lying southerly there or near upon the foresaid continent." to the Attorney General in London, Sir Robert Heath. The foresaid continent that he mentioned was referring to the province of Carolina, the forerunner of both North and South Carolina states in the United States, which were also part of Heath's patent. I had a look about him, but I couldn't seem to find that he did anything to any of these places. However, 1629 was seen as the start of the colony, and so 300 years later, this stamp commemorates it. Another commemoration, 1942, and by now George VI is king, and his definitives have been overprinted, marking 450 years since Columbus's landfall. 1954, Elizabeth II is now the Queen, and there's a new definitive series, the majority of which were issued in 1954, but there were one or two minor variants up until 1964. Another overprint, this one from 1963, and this one on the previous definitive series was to commemorate the talks between John F. Kennedy and Harold Macmillan about the nuclear deterrent. Further overprint, this one, the new constitution in 1964, which gave internal autonomy to the Bahamas, again on that definitive set. Now, ostensibly, these all look like they're the same series. However, there are three separate issues according to the rows. The top row is the new set of definitives from 1965, but they didn't last very long because they are in the original British currency. You'll see 1D, and the stamp on the right is 2 shillings. 1 year later, the Bahamian dollar was adopted, so the old currency was overprinted. Then a further year later, 1967, for those keeping track, the stamps were reissued once again, this time inscribed with the new currency. A new definitive series in 1971 that ran until 1978. There are some variations of watermark, but I am not very good at looking at watermark, so I don't really get involved with that. However, I do think this is a nice set of stamps. A throwback to some of the other British colonies and territories that I've already talked about in previous episodes. This is from 1972, as you can see, the Royal Silver Wedding. The examples I've put there from Anguilla and Ascension, you can see the same theme with the local varieties, which I think kind of looks pretty good when you look at them together. Now, the Bahamas is an independent country and looking to diversify its economy. This is from 1975, and I must say they didn't really do a lot of diversification because they were still very reliant on tourism when COVID hit, and it really negatively impacted the islands. The series here from the history of the Bahamas. So let's see how well I did covering it earlier. And the top row shows Columbus's landfall, Blackbeard, and the Pirate Age, and then the Eleuthera adventurers. So that's pretty good. I think I mentioned all of those. In the middle row, the 10 cents is the ceremonial mace, which I didn't say anything about. So I looked it up. Like many ex-British colonies and Commonwealth countries, the Bahamas has a ceremonial mace in its parliament. And that mace has had some adventures. On Black Tuesday in 1965, it was flung out of the window of the Parliament during a dispute, and Parliament had to be suspended because the rules state that Parliament cannot convene without the mace. The mace had been badly damaged, and Canada lent a temporary mace to replace it. The 21-cent stamp recalls the bootlegging period during US Prohibition. Then there's various agricultural activities before the $3 stamp, which celebrates the banking system. And talking back about the offshore banking that I mentioned earlier. In 2016, the leaked Panama Papers showed that the Bahamas has the most offshore entities and companies in the world. Two commemorative stamps here. On the left, the bicentennial of the arrival of the American Loyalists, and that's the New Plymouth Hotel. And on the right, the 250th anniversary of the first edition of Lloyd's List. Lloyd's List covers shipping news, maritime insurance, logistics, global trade, and offshore energy. And according to Lloyd's, the Bahamas Maritime Authority was the 8th largest shipping registry, also called a flag state, in 2025. Number one, if you're interested, Liberia. From 1987, an aircraft series. This one shows an Eastern Airlines plane. Eastern were based in Miami and flew, amongst other destinations, to the Bahamas. However, they went bust 4 years after this series was issued. The other airlines in the series were the Bahamas Air, Pan Am, and British Airways. The third issue of the Nature Detection Stamp. This shows the Kirtland's warbler. It's the first recorded specimen was shot in 1841 by Samuel Cabot III between Great Abaco in the Bahamas and Cuba. It wasn't recognized as a new species until it came to the Museum of the Smithsonian Institute in the 1860s. The bird winters in the Bahamas and breeds in the Great Lakes area of Canada and the USA, and at times has been critically endangered, but thankfully now is currently not threatened. And finally, my most recent stamps from 2001. More birds, this time showing their eggs. We have the Bahama mockingbird on the 50-cent stamp, and Audubon's shearwater, which is now known as the Sargasso shearwater, on the 70-cent stamp. It makes its nest in burrows and rock crevices, and apparently can live up to 15 years of age. So these are my stamps, or some of them, from the Bahamas. My name is Keith. Goodbye.